We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Really? We're going to blame that loss on a boat trip? How about they're just not really that good of a team and they had a crappy day with some bad drops, and it's football.
It's January 2017, Giants at Packers. This is Remember That Game, a podcast about sporting events that take you on a journey and maybe chart the path of the zeitgeist. I'm your host, Thomas Emerick, and my guest is Charles McDonald, Giants and Jets beat reporter with the New York Daily News at the time, now with Yahoo Sports. We recorded this in Indianapolis during the 2020 NFL Combine. Enjoy the show.
The funny thing with that team is they were maxed out. They had a bunch of big contracts that year, and they overachieved that year. So they end up with an 11-5 record, and I was doing some research on that team, like more advanced numbers, but based on their performance that year, they were expected to win only 8 games. Even though they made the wild card round and won 11 games, they still had one of the worst offenses in the league that year. They were 26th in the league in points per game, but they were second in defense on points allowed. So as you study football and study football numbers, you kind of learn that year to year, defensive performance is not that stable. So when you have this offense that's not good and it's relying solely on the defense and solely on guys like Landon Collins and Damon Harrison making plays, that's not really a way to continue success in the NFL. So you get to the next year and it all kind of falls apart. One thing that I think when you have these teams that overachieve like they do, like the Giants did in 2016, is it sets unrealistic expectations for moving forward. I mean, the year after that was when McAdoo benched Eli, right?
Yeah, in 2017, and he also had the argument with Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie where the team said they suspended Cromartie because he left, but then it turned out some people were saying he left after McAdoo said he was suspended, but you have one of the most important defensive players from the previous year not getting along with the coach.
Right, and it just goes to show, you can't really bank on a good defense being that good the year after. So they were never really a good offensive team even that year. It's just kind of like the Odell Beckham show, because he was really carrying that team in terms of consistently making big plays and being able to move the ball a little bit. So you already at that point have an Eli Manning who is over the hill, and then once you move on from that season, it just all starts to fall apart. Because then they trade Damon Harrison that was 2018, I think. But once that defense starts to fall apart, the offense has already been exposed, and now you're in a situation where you are now, where you had to blow it all up and rebuild, and they're still dealing with that, almost 4 years later.
And another reference for that Giants team overperforming, their PFF, composite rank of their grades had the Giants ranked 23rd in the NFL that season. Almost a weekly occurrence where the game is on the line between the Giants and a mediocre opponent, and either Odell Beckham takes a slant 60 yards or someone like DRC houses a pick and puts it away. Do you feel like overperforming basically what their expected outcome would have been resulted in Eli Manning being kept around in another year or two? Yeah,
because one thing that we see with not just the Giants, not unique to them, but every team, is when you win a lot of games, I don't think teams are as critical of themselves as they need to be, and they tend to just run it back. Like you could look at that year with Eli, or even, how about this year with the Packers? Like when you watch them and you see that they get the second seed in the NFC, but they're just winning close games every single week, and they happen to run to another team in the Seahawks that was winning close games every week. So, one of those teams has to go to the NFC Championship game, and then the Packers won, and we saw, okay, this is what a really good team looks like versus a team that won a lot of close games. So you get to a situation where we won a lot of games, so why don't we just do the same thing next year? And that's not really a healthy way to approach not just coaching, but roster building and planning for the future. So even if you're in a situation where Eli doesn't play well, but they win a lot of games, so they bring him back, and he's a hometown legend. So I think that's what kept him in New York as long as it did, because you still have that hope that we can recapture that season and go on another run before he retires. But it never happened again for them.
Eli Manning in that playoff game, the wild card at Lambeau, not terrible, a victim of a couple drops in the first drive that would have been touchdowns from Shep.
Odell didn't play that well.
And Beckham, yeah. Odell had 5 targets into Ladarius Gunter's coverage with only 1 catch, and you can't be having that. But do you feel like their bad day and the way the media in some ways was able to blame it on the boat trip kind of gave Eli a pass on having been kind of a diminished quarterback that season as well?
A little bit. I mean, I think that I know from now that I've stepped into being a New York media member, I know that I look at that situation way different than maybe some of the people who don't look like me would look at that situation, because who cares about really going on a boat trip, and it's really, at the end of the day, it's not a big deal. And if you know how hard these guys work at their craft on a day-to-day basis, flying to Miami for a day and hanging out on a boat that's not a factor in any real performance. But hey, these guys are going to Miami for a day, or they're going on a boat for a day, a few days before a playoff game. But if they're off, who cares? If they don't have to be watching film or don't have to be working, or if it's their rest day, it's not really a big deal. So, I mean, I remember looking at it from an outside perspective, really, we're gonna blame that loss on a boat trip? How about they're just not really that good of a team, and they had a crappy day with some bad drops, and it's football. You have a one. It's part of what makes the playoffs so fun. At the same time, you have a 1-game sample, and you're just kind of hinging, everything you believe about these teams on 1 game, and a lot of people chose to go the route that it was the boat trip's fault.
I've been a Giants fan all my life, and I kind of left that thinking, oh crap, they're going to scapegoat Odell for why they lost a game where they were an average team that was overmatched on the road. And that's going to prevent them from addressing being an average team the way they should.
Right. And, that guy that plays quarterback for the Packers is pretty good too. And he was – and I mean, at 2016, Matt Ryan won the MVP that year, but, there were plenty of people who thought Aaron Rodgers should have been the MVP too. So, you're an average team. You had some bad drops, and the other quarterback's a lot better. It seems like a pretty simple equation for me.
Aaron Rodgers that day put up nearly 400, very efficient, 4 touchdowns. That season, Packers had the number 1 pass block unit and the number 3 passing grade from Pro Football Focus. That pass grade was behind only a historic passing output from the Falcons and historic QB play from Tom Brady. But perhaps the Packers also got some false positives that year. They go into the next game. Aaron Rodgers has the heroic second half against the Cowboys, that final drive. They go in, get spanked by the Falcons. I kind of wonder if the Packers said, okay, this means we can put any receivers around Aaron Rodgers and we find the pass blocking is going to be the best in the league every year. And we can go from Jared Cook to Jimmy Graham, and whether it's a downgrade or not, it shouldn't matter. Jordy Nelson's getting old. Randall Cobb, who tore the Giants apart, especially when Dominic Rodgers got injured in that wild card game, and then he's just tearing up Trevin Wade in the slot, going at Eli Apple. They say, hey, we can trade Randall Cobb away. We can bank on some rookies being okay, and Rodgers can carry us. And the past few years have shown that that wasn't the team building approach to be successful.
Yeah. You're in a situation now where maybe at one point you could have put anybody around Aaron Rodgers, but he's 36, 35 around that age now. So when you look at the Packers receiving core, it's Devontae Adams and who else? A bunch of second-year rookies, and none of those guys were premium picks. A couple of them are even UDFAs, like Alan Lazard and Jake Kumaro or something like that. So now they're probably looking at this like, man, like we didn't prepare for the decline of Aaron Rodgers as well as we should have, and maybe it is because of the heroics of that 2016 season where he was still God mode Aaron Rodgers, where like you just talked about that throw against the Cowboys is one of the best throws in the NFL history, where he just rolls out to his left and slings it, and it ends like the margin for error on that throw is so small, and it's almost when you've in that position of as a Packers fan, a Packers coach, Packers front office executive, and you've seen him just do this stuff for at that point over a decade. It's hard to think that there's a point in his life where he won't be able to do that, and we're here, and we're at that point where he's good, but he's not Robo Rodgers anymore. So they got to get back on finding weapons for him, and I think that he was so good at that season that they thought that they could just build other pieces of their roster, and they ignored receiver to a degree.
And in this playoff run, they do get that false positive, much like the Giants got some false positives. Rewatching that game, did you think the Giants were dead right off missing those first two fades on the first drive, or was it more they're dead at halftime when the Packers get the Hail Mary on them?
Dead at halftime, because I know like we're in an age where analytics are becoming more prevalent, and I love like the use of analytics in sports where or football where we're measuring the efficiency on stuff and what have you, but there's still a human element where it's not like they're just a bunch of robots on the field where you just kind of reset your emotions after every play. When Aaron Rodgers Hail Mary on you in halftime of a playoff game, that sucks. Like that's really demoralizing because it doesn't stop there. You still got 2 more quarters of stopping. That was one of the best seasons of his career.
Eli Apple loses Randall Cobb at the back of the end zone. Yeah. Do you feel like that had any impact on Eli Apple being later traded?
I'm not sure. I think they just realized they made a mistake, and it's like one of the few times in recent history where you see the Giants go, "Oh, that was not the right pick for us to make. Let's try to get something back on it while we can." Because you see Belichick do that all the time. Where if you go back and look at Belichick's history with defensive backs in the second round in recent memory, he's drafted one almost every year since like 2012, and I think the only one that's still in the team is like Patrick Chung, and Belichick's at a point where he's like, it's better for me to give up on a bad player earlier than to waiting just because I made an investment on him. So I think that's it was like a rare moment of cognization for the Giants where they're like, we got to get something for this because it's not working for us. So I don't really know if that play had much to do with it. More of it just wasn't the right fit.
In the second half, you also Eli had a decent first half. Things kind of fall apart in the second half. Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie goes out. Devontae Adams starts dicing up Eli Apple, and then Cobb gets Trevin Wade in the slot. It seems like the Giants are just finally now, years later, figuring out what to do with the secondary post the Jerry Reese splurge. Do you feel like the Giants have been too slow to address the secondary in the years since, and even during the Shermer era, and now during the overlapping Gettleman era?
I don't know if it's slow, but they kind of have gone all in on this young secondary now, because there's already plenty of rumors, like credible rumors about if Jeff Okudah, the Ohio State corner, if he falls to 4, he could go there. And they already have. Think about it. Like DeAndre Baker was a rookie last year. Julian Love was a rookie last year. Both those guys played, got significant playing time in just about every game. Julian started at safety once Jabril Peppers got hurt at the end of the season. Sam Beal, last year was essentially his first year in the league because he missed all of his rookie year. So, like, having a secondary that young, and then, the Janoris, whatever happened, like, the Janoris debacle at the end of the year where he was calling fans a slur on Twitter while the Giants were practicing, and then he got cut later in the week. Like, it's a very, very, very young unit, like one of the youngest in the league. So you kind of end up in a situation, I think unintentionally almost, where it's just not going to be a very good secondary, and it's not really a fault of the quality of the players. They just don't have that much experience. So yeah, I'm interested to see how this all goes, but maybe you're right. Like, maybe they did wait a little bit too long to start restocking that secondary with young talent, because now they really only have young talent outside of, trying to re-sign a guy like Michael Thomas, who they definitely see as a veteran leader, or Jabril, who's had a couple years in the NFL now.
We're driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Just go to Indeed.com/Blue Wire right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
For over 10 years, Grammarly has been powered by AI technology you can trust and rely on for all of your writing needs. And now Grammarly helps you do even more. With one click, you and your team can quickly brainstorm, rewrite, and reply with suggestions based on your context and goals where you write the most. Grammarly accelerates effectiveness and productivity for everyone on your team. In fact, more than 70,000 teams rely on Grammarly to help them with their writing today. Have a presentation coming up? Let Grammarly create a personalized outline to get you organized, so you can transform your ideas into a compelling presentation. With Grammarly, you can be more productive by communicating your point clearly and getting work done efficiently. Grammarly is here to assist you at every step of your writing process, so you can show up with confidence. Go to Grammarly.com/businessteams to download for free. That's GRAMMARLY.com/businessteams to download for free.
Last season, you have a year where you have arguably the worst secondary in the league, and you come out of it still not knowing what to do next because it's hard to tell if they're bad or they're just young and learning. But as you mentioned, and I heard you talk on the 2-for-1 podcast yesterday here at the Combine, DeAndre Baker came along as the season went down the stretch. So you also do get some positive things. How do you think Gettleman has shaped this? I heard you also on the 2-for-1 podcast say he's a content machine. Think that his frankness and in some ways degaff, in some ways trollish toward the analytics community mindset changes the way they build a team, or if it's just all personality.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing we need to see is like who's really in charge here when it comes to the Giants, because if you asked me a month ago, I would say that Dave Gettleman is definitely running things, but after this week, I feel like Joe Judge has kind of seized power there. Because just think about this, like if you're thinking about this rationally, and Dave Gettleman's the GM of the Giants, he drafted Daniel Jones 6 last year. He is, after the first start against Tampa Bay, we hear from Dave where he's puffing his chest about how good Daniel Jones was in that game. And even on the day that Joe Judge was hired, Dave is saying Daniel Jones is my franchise quarterback. Joe Judge in that press conference that same day says, I can't make any declarations about any player until I've seen them, until I've worked with them hands-on, until I've given them time for critical feedback, stuff like that. So he's like, I won't say that anyone's starting because I just haven't worked with these guys, which is, football hardo nonsense, but fine. If that's the angle you want to take, I'm not really going to be pressed about it like other people might be. Fast forward to this week at the Combine. Now, when you ask Dave is Daniel Jones' starting quarterback. Dave is saying what Joe Judge is saying now, where, I'm not going to name any starting quarterback right now. I'm not going to name any starting player on the depth chart. But you just said a month ago that DJ is your starting quarterback, and he's like the future of the franchise. Oh, okay. Now you're pedaling back on what Judge is saying, and not vice versa. Like so Judge has been hired, for 7 weeks? In that time span, he's already gotten this much control, at least over the narrative of what's going to be released to the public. So I kind of feel like the clock's ticking on Dave, rightfully so. I mean, the team is terrible, and he admitted publicly that he didn't realize that he couldn't rebuild and contend at the same time, which is like, all right, a 10-year-old that plays Madden kind of figures that one out. Unless you have someone like Aaron Rodgers or Patrick Mahomes or a quarterback of that caliber, you're not going to be able to rebuild and contend at the same time. So I think, for him to admit that, and now for Judge to at least, being able to control the public narrative, I don't know how much power Dave actually has right now. He, to some degree, it's a collaborative effort, but Judge is definitely the one pushing how he speaks to the public now. Because think about where Judge is coming from to what he stepped into. How could you ever imagine Bill Belichick working with Dave Gettleman? Think about that. Like the way he speaks in public, the way he's staunchly drafted, guys at bad value over the past years. It's just not even from a philosophical difference, from a personality standpoint, they are just so different. So I think Judge's got the power now. He's got the 5-year contract, so he's at least got that in his favor. And I think, if they suck again this year, like, peace, Dave.
Do you feel like the way Eli's offensive lines kind of made the twilight of his career a little rough, especially from that second Super Bowl win on? It was never really an above-average offensive line. Do you think that's changing how they were going to address that with Daniel Jones, especially when you hear various offensive linemen mock to them, including their first-round pick?
Yeah, I mean, I think they need to fix the offensive line because it's just bad right now. Like the Nate Solder signing predictably did not work out at all. I mean, to give Nate all that money, and he's a nice guy, but even at the end of his time in New England, like, it wasn't like he was playing very well. Like, that was always, even from an outsider perspective, that was a really head-scratching move. And you really only have one guy or two in Zeitler. Zeitler's pretty solid, and Hernandez is solid. But, offensive line is more about the sum of the units and individual pieces. So if you have two good guys at left guard and right guard, and then 3 guys that can't play, you have a bad offensive line. And I think they'll try to figure it out. Like they have a bunch of money to work with in free agency this year, but it's kind of interesting because you had Richburg and Pugh, who at one point were considered 2 of the better offensive linemen, or 2 of the better interior offensive linemen in the NFL. And Richburg has dealt with a ton of injuries. Pugh the same, and I don't know if the Giants miss those guys per se, but I think they definitely miss like the peak of their play. But I think based on the trajectory of their careers, it's hard to say that they'll be playing at a high level right now.
In 2016, both stayed relatively healthy, and they had Marshall Newhouse at right tackle, who is kind of like a swing tackle you're not psyched to be going to a season with, but ended up being better than some of the other people they trotted in at right tackle, and you really see what kind of drop-off you can get. Last question here. I feel like this 2016 Giants team, that Jerry Reese splurge that brought them to the wild card game, do you feel like there are any other major lessons from that season that maybe Joe Judge takes note of as he starts building as a seemingly the one calling the shots here?
Like, I think one thing that we've learned is secondary play matters so much in the NFL, and even if it's hard to replicate coverage or coverage performance on the season basis, or even quite frankly a game-to-game basis, it's good to just load up on talent on the secondary. And we've seen Belichick do that in recent years. I mean, we don't really ever see Belichick pay big money to just about anyone, but he gave them money to Stephon Gilmore. Obviously, it's worked out because he was Defensive Player of the Year last year, and they keep investing in guys like Jonathan Jones, the other corner. They try to just get those guys in every year, and even if it doesn't work out, we'll try again next year because that position is so important. Your safeties, your corners, like I think we're getting to a point in the NFL where they're more important than the pass rushers, which wasn't the case or wasn't thought of even just a few years ago. So, I think that game, outside of the cautions of maybe not trying to improve upon a 10-win season or not trying to, critically look at yourself after an 11-win season, is secondary play. And they've got a good opportunity to add, an elite one in Jeff Okudah if he falls to 4.
Yeah, and those Patriots teams that Joe Judge saw up close, like they did splurge for Gilmore, but it's a lot of just throwing mid to low priced assets at it. Whereas that 2016 Giants team, they're able to throw a bunch of money. It's concentrated in a few guys without so much depth, and then you have that variance at the cornerback position. Yeah. Janoris Jenkins and DRC have their career year in 2016, but then they hit that variance the following years, and not enough depth around that.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the program, Charles.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
This has been another episode of Remember That Game. Please rate, review, subscribe, and check out more episodes.
When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Bakers, fresh for everyone.